Hello and welcome to Business Africa with me, Ronald Kato. This week, is Africa's industrialization campaign stalling? Despite industrial output increasing in several countries, manufacturing as a share of GDP has stagnated. We shine some light on the UN's third industrial development decade for Africa. Plus, Burundi is looking to switch gears. East Africa's smallest economy is looking to diversify into industry. Known for coffee and rare minerals, Burundi also aims to add value to its exports in order to create more jobs at home. Also, floods pour cold water on South Africa's recovering industrial activity. Authorities say the flooding in April caused nearly $500 million in losses as the country's industrial heartland ground to a halt. Stay with us for these and more details. Thank you for joining us. Almost all African countries have industrialization as a goal in their respective national development plans, but Africa remains the world's least industrialized region. Only South Africa is categorized as industrialized. The United Nations declared 2016 to 2025 as the third industrial development decade for Africa. But with the pandemic, a recession, and the war in Ukraine, there is concern that the window of opportunity for Africa to become a manufacturing hub is closing fast.
Despite efforts made by countries over the years to industrialize, Africa's share of global manufacturing remains negligible. Manufacturing has been touted as key to unlocking productive jobs, bigger export revenues, and sustainable development. Despite being endowed with natural resources, most African countries ship out raw material as there's little domestic manufacturing taking place. In 2019, Africa's industrial GDP expanded by 17% to $731 billion, with the value added of manufacturing surging by 39%, according to the African Development Bank. But Africa's industrialization is geographically limited, with around two-thirds of value-added manufacturing taking place in just 5 nations. Countries export far less manufactured goods than they import. To promote industrialization, African countries have to build the requisite infrastructure, skills development, make quality connections with agriculture and mining, and embrace technology. The challenges aside, there are also plenty of opportunities. The Continental Free Trade Area is a chance to boost intra-African trade in manufactured goods and investment in industry. As China, Europe and India begin to offshore light manufacturing, countries can create the conditions to direct investment to manufacturing. Africa's manufacturing ambitions have been hit hard by the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, but the two crises can also be seen as opportunities to build local manufacturing capacity to reduce dependency.
Bernardo Causa de la Sarmiento is the Managing Director in charge of digitalization, technology, and agribusiness at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. What, in your assessment, are the most important challenges holding back Africa's industrialization drive?
At UNIDO, we see it from a point of view of integration of global value chains. So far, the integration into the international market has been a pathway for industrialization. But what is important for African countries is to look inwards, to look into the market. And this is the big challenge. What is holding back is this constant viewing abroad and not seeing that this continent has a big potential if it integrates. There is production capacities, there are skills, people, there are raw materials. Certainly, as we heard this morning, one of the big gaps is investment.
Speaking of integration, the Continental Free Trade Area went into operation over a year ago. What opportunities exist there for countries to boost their manufacturing capacities?
So one important element for investment to happen is to have the institution in place, and this can happen through a regional integration. I strongly believe in what is called the subsidiarity principle, that not everything has to be looked at the pan-continental level. We have then the different sub-regional levels, but there is a role for the countries also to be played. And at the level of the countries, it's very important to create the conditions by investing in infrastructure for example, special economic zones. They will bring this possibility for investment into a given sector. And among the sectors, I believe there is a huge potential now that we are witnessing a food security crisis to invest in food, to invest in agri-industrial development so that the continent can secure its foods on its own.
You mentioned special economic zones, and countries such as Ethiopia have been actively creating industrial parks over the last 10 years. Is this the right model to go about making Africa a manufacturing hub?
UNIDO has identified the industrial parks, the economic zones, as one key mean of implementation of SDG 9, of inclusive, sustainable industrial development, because it creates the necessary ecosystem. You bring together in one place the infrastructure, you develop the skills, you provide all the services for the industrial park. This attracts very much the investor. The case of Ethiopia, we have in Jirmalayan a very good example, 100,000 jobs, direct jobs created, 400,000 jobs, indirect jobs created. This is very attractive for a government. The case of Ethiopia certainly is a bit different. They have certain conditions. They have this abundance of labor. They have their geographical situation. So we believe in this model, but it is not one size fits all. We need to adjust to the different conditions of the country.
What about manufacturing technology? Should countries make tech transfer a condition for foreign direct investors?
I strongly believe this is not the right way to do, not the conditionality, because investment will bring the technology if the conditions are there. We have seen last week we had at the WTO the waiver for the patents for COVID vaccines. Will Africa benefit from it? Most of the countries have not the conditions to do it. So I think that if you have the more basic condition to benefit and to attract investment, you will then automatically bring the technology along.
Bernardo Causadilla Sarmiento, nice to have you. Thank you very much for your time. In its development blueprint named Vision 2025, Burundi aims to build a competitive and diversified economy. Agro-processing and value addition to coffee, cotton, and minerals are the key features of the country's plan to move into light manufacturing.
This Made in Burundi exhibition seeks to showcase the progress made by the country in promoting industry and its competitiveness in the African Continental Free Trade Area. The East African country is eager to industrialize and is rallying the private sector to invest in agro-processing, value addition, and light manufacturing.
Burundi continues to improve the business climate, strengthening the legal and regulatory framework to support the development of the industrial sector, building the capacity of quality control agencies, increasing investments in energy and transport sectors.
But there's still plenty of work to be done. This economist says authorities need to invest in enabling infrastructure in order to unlock the country's manufacturing potential.
At the institutional level, it is the lack of support of the private sector by the government where we see monopolies, corruptions, all that limits the development of the private sector. Monopoly, fiscal instability, tax insecurity, inappropriate monetary policy, and macroeconomic framework.
According to the World Bank, Burundi remains the poorest country in the world with a GDP per capita of $269. Its trade balance is in deficit.
South Africa's manufacturing sector had a solid first quarter of 2022 until floods struck the country's industrial heartland of KwaZulu-Natal. The statistics agency said in its June report that output fell by 7.8% in April as over 800 factories were forced to suspend operations.
South Africa's manufacturing activity could be headed for a weak showing in the second quarter of the year after devastating floods in the country's industrial heatland of KwaZulu-Natal. In its June report, the country's statistics agency said manufacturing production contracted more than expected in April, reflecting the adverse impact of severe flooding and intense power cuts. Output plunged by 7.8% from a year earlier in April, the agency said. The main declines were observed in the production of motor vehicles, parts and accessories, and other transport equipment. A Toyota plant was forced to temporarily shut down due to flooding. South Africa's manufacturing had a remarkable first quarter, buoyed by the lifting of pandemic restrictions. The floods, which also killed at least 400 people, disrupted operations at the port of Durban, sub-Saharan Africa's busiest.
And that wraps up this episode of Business Africa with me, Ronald Kato. The news continues on air and online. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Business Africa.